All right, let's dive into one of the most wild stories in all of history. We're talking about how a private company, a group of merchants, somehow ended up conquering an entire subcontinent. This is the story of the Great Game for India.
I mean, how does that even happen, right? Think about it. A business whose whole goal is profit suddenly becomes a government, an army, and the ruler of millions of people. It's kind of mind-boggling. To figure it out, we've got to rewind the clock to the 18th century. So, the first piece of the puzzle is this. For someone to rise, someone else often has to fall. And back in 18th century India, a once unstoppable empire was starting to crack, leaving this huge void that was just waiting to be filled.
You see, for a long, long time, the Mughal Empire was the dominant force in India. But by the mid 1700s, that power was seriously fading. And the empire didn't just, gracefully bow out. It shattered. It broke into all these different pieces. And that's when ambitious regional players like the Marathas and the Kingdom of Mysore saw their chance. They started grabbing territory, basically fighting over the scraps of this once great empire. And this whole situation created what we call a power vacuum. There was no single strong leader in charge anymore. The whole subcontinent was like a chessboard with no king, and the game was suddenly wide open for brand new players to jump in and make their move.
And who steps on to this chaotic chessboard? Well, that's where our main characters come in. Two huge European companies that looked at all this fragmentation and didn't see chaos. They saw a massive opportunity, a chance for incredible profit, and maybe something more.
So you've got the British East India Company on one side and the French Compagnie des Indes on the other. Now, both of them started out as just trading companies, right? Shipping spices, textiles, that sort of thing. But they figured something out really fast. To protect your business in a place this unstable, you need power. And to get power, well, you need soldiers. These companies started to look less like businesses and more like armies. And as you can probably guess, this rivalry didn't stay friendly for long. It wasn't just about market share. It exploded into actual war. And the very first big showdown happened in this one key region in southeastern India. We're talking about the Carnatic region, this incredibly valuable piece of real estate right on the coast. It was packed with valuable ports and trade routes. I mean, this place was basically destined to become the main battleground for the British and the French to fight it out for control of southern India. And just look at how close their main headquarters were. The British were set up in Madras, and the French were just a little ways down the coast in Pondicherry. They were practically staring at each other, like really, really unfriendly neighbors. With them being that close, a fight was pretty much inevitable. So how did they actually fight? Well, a lot of the time it was indirect. They became absolute masters of the proxy war. Here's how it worked. They'd find two local Indian princes fighting over a throne. The British would pick one side, give them money, guns, and soldiers, and then the French would back the other guy. It was this really clever and pretty cynical way for them to fight each other and expand their own power without actually having to declare war on each other back in Europe. This whole thing just kept escalating. Over about 20 years, it exploded into three major conflicts we call the Carnatic Wars. The first one was kind of just a spillover from a war happening back in Europe. But the second one? That was all about them using local princes to fight each other for Indian thrones. And by the third war, forget proxies. It was an all-out brawl for total control. This was the one that would decide everything. So, after all that fighting, one side came out on top. And in winning, they didn't just change the game in India. They changed what their company was. And here's the bottom line. By the time the dust settled, the French were done. Their dream of an Indian empire shattered. The British East India Company, thanks to a stronger navy, deeper pockets, and some really smart and ruthless politics, had completely kicked their biggest rival off the board. So what did that victory actually look like on the ground? Well, you just have to look at a map of India to see the change. And believe me, it was a big one. Remember that shattered map we saw at the start? We'll take a look at it now, just a couple of decades later, in 1785. See all those areas shaded in, marked British territory? That's it. That's the result of those wars. A private company was literally drawing its own empire onto the map. And it wasn't just any land. We're talking about Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, the absolute richest provinces in all of India. This was the economic heartland.
You add in the major ports of Madras and Bombay, and suddenly the company has its hands on the economic jugular of the entire subcontinent. This wasn't about a few trading posts anymore. This was a full-on money-making empire.
So, what happened to the old guard? The traditional rulers? Well, this little note on the map pretty much says it all. The Mughal emperor? Yeah, he was still around in Delhi, but he was a ruler in name only. He had no real power. He was basically living under the protection of stronger forces. First the Marathas, and soon the British themselves.
And that right there is the key transformation. The East India Company wasn't just a trading firm anymore, not even close. It started out looking for profit, sure, but by winning this great game, it turned into something else entirely. It became a government, a corporate ruler. And that leaves us with a really big and frankly, a pretty chilling question. We've seen countries conquer other countries throughout history. But what happens when a private company, a business driven by profit, is in charge of millions of people? What does it mean for the people of India when their new government's main job isn't to look after them, but to make money for its shareholders back in London?